In all of my crazy military and life experiences, shit, you want to read this? Or would you rather I read it?
Please read it. It's really strangely cathartic to have you read it.
Got it. In all of my crazy military and life experiences, these 3 civilians dropping in to rescue the rescuers is as profound as any that I've had. I was in the military 25 years. I possess a lifetime of combat and rescue experiences, none bearing the magnitude of Bulldog Bite. But in all of my deployments, no one has come to tattoo me afterward. In all of my deployments, nothing like that has ever remotely happened. So how can I even explain their appearance? Is it just me and my mind that gives it such weight? My imagination? It can't be. Is that God? Grace? Mercy? What is that? Whatever it is, I can tell you this. The magic of them coming into my life, then, haunts the fuck out of me. I cannot explain it. And of course, I'm driven to try to recreate that for others. I was responsible for the guys who were there, and I wanted to try to help foster and create moments that would have value for them. But beyond that, I don't know. I have no answers. Honestly, I was probably looking to validate my own experiences too, my own shallow life, my own weird experiences on that mountain with those men dying in my arms. And at some level, I too wanted to feel valued. Somewhere inside me, I was probably looking for a sign that the universe gave a fuck, or that what we did was even real, or that all that suffering mattered. I know for certain I was struggling with the fact that I had returned with nothing to show for that experience other than a sense of overwhelming grief, a mountain of survivor's guilt and isolation. Perhaps I understood that if Scott tattooed me, well, then that was real. And then I at least have a timestamp of the time and place. Welcome to Glorious Professionals, brought to you by GoRuck Media. I'm here with Roger Sparks, Oz Sparks, and Scott Campbell. And the excerpt that I just read was from Roger's book, Warrior's Creed. So, these two met in Afghanistan, Roger and Scott, and want to kind of dig into some of what that experience was like from Scott's perspective, because I've chatted with Roger, and he's like, man, I was just living it. But Scott was there with a different mission, and then that became part of Roger's and Oz's and so many other lives. And and then I want to talk a little bit about the therapy through tattooing. So Scott, welcome to the show.
Thanks, man. Yeah, I guess kind of the broad strokes of Raj and I meeting, but he's one of those people who just has defined what it means to be a man in my world. So I'm like, anything Roger's doing, Roger could call me up and just be like, hey, I want to do a car wash. I'd be like, cool, give me a rag. I'll wash cars next to you. Whatever you're doing, I'll mow lawns, I'll talk on podcasts, whatever. Yeah. So that whole trip was crazy for me. And it's, it's funny. A lot of times, with artwork and stuff, you just start a drawing or you start a painting and you don't really know why you did it until afterwards. I never thought I could be an artist because I'd walk into these, I'd walk into a museum or a gallery and they always have this explanation of here's why this painter painted this. And it was during this time and this is what it means. And I was always like, well, shit, I can't be an artist because I've never woken up with this mission statement in my head and been like, oh, I'm going to go make something. Cause this, it's I realized later on that as an artist, you make the thing and then afterwards you learn why you made it, and it's kind of this leap of faith. And that trip is definitely similar to that in that I didn't know what I was doing or where I was going or why.
So walk us through that. Walk us through why you were there and what you were hoping to get and how the stars just kind of aligned. What was it like showing up on that remote part of the base?
Well, so I guess it was 2010?
Yeah.
I guess it's somewhere around there. Yeah. 2010, so it's kind of at a moment. I spent 20 some odd years doing tattoos and it was a moment when I was kind of frustrated with tattooing and, there was this craft that I loved and I had grown up loving and done a long time, but it kind of got hijacked by reality TV and mall culture. And, I was really kind of trying to find soulful tattooing, I was like, I still love tattooing, but I need to get back to why I love it. And I had done a few projects tattooing in prisons, working on prisoners and really got a lot out of that. I just wanted to do tattooing that mattered. I wanted to do tattooing that had a real emotional value, not just an aesthetic value. So yeah, me and a couple of buddies of mine got asked to do this like video project documenting me tattooing. And I was like, we did prisons. I was like, let's go to the front lines of a war and like, let's just tattoo soldiers. And, because I was interested in like, somebody who's kind of out there, in the thick of it, what's emotionally valuable to them, like what's going on in their lives that they're like, yeah, this is what I want to document. This is what I want to have carved into my arm today. So that literally just that idea got us to like swindle Huffington Post into giving us some press passes. And we got on a flight and landed at Bagram and was there for a couple days, just not really knowing what we were doing, and the Air Force didn't know what to do with this either. Like they had like this press officer that was like our handler. And they're like, I don't know, there's a couple baggage handlers with tattoos. Go talk to them, or just like, so we would just like hang out in the gym on the base and
for those that don't know out there, Bagram is like a city. I haven't been, but I've been to comparable places. I mean, you got dry cleaning, you've got,
Yeah, it felt like a college campus to me. I mean, yeah, it really is like a little city in the middle of the desert. But so we were wandering around and didn't really know what we were doing. And I remember driving, we were riding by the main road. Was it Disney Road?
Yeah, Disney. Disney's the name of the main road.
Yeah. And we saw these two guys walking down the street. And I asked our babysitter, I was like, who are those guys? Because they just like, the posture was different. They're, and they're like, oh, those are like PJs. And I was like, what's a PJ? I don't even know what that means. And he's like, oh, we'll go, by their barracks later. And so anyway, they took us by their barracks. And I remember walking up and there was like some like ABC News like thing set up or something or other. There was like a bunch of lights and somebody interviewing some of them. And I had just heard like 5 seconds, somebody like shed a little bit of light on what they had just gone through, because like they literally just landed from Bulldog Bite. And I mean, literally like still had blood and guts all over their pants and stuff. And here I am with this like press officer, like, it is like, oh, like, this is like Roger, like this is Scott Campbell. He was a tattoo artist from Brooklyn. And I literally, in that moment, I was like, I was embarrassed to be there. I was like, I remember looking up at Raj, because for those of you listening, Raj is 9 feet tall, but I remember looking up at Raj and just like, just being like, I don't deserve to like breathe the same air as this guy. You know what I mean? Like, I'm just some like artsy fartsy kid from Brooklyn, but I could just see in Roger's face the gravity of where his head was at and what he was going through. And I was like, I'm sorry for even like standing in front of you right now. And I was like, I'm a tattoo artist. It's the one trick I got. All I know how to do is do tattoos. But if that's in any way useful to you, my hands are at your service. And I remember Raj like looked at our babysitter and looked at me. He's like, you do tattoos? I was like, yeah. He's like, yeah, I think we do need that. And he's like, go to their barracks and pack up their stuff. Like this kid's staying with me. And I was like, all right. So literally like our babysitter went and packed up all our gear. And I walked into that like building and like didn't walk out for like 4 days. We just like
what were you feeling? Because the way that Roger describes it is there was a lot of humanity and you're like, fuck, this is wrong. Like we're out. Right.
Well, I just didn't want to be in the way. You know what I mean? Like here I am like exploring like whatever my artistic curiosity. And these guys are like living like an immediate like life or death reality. And just like the stakes of it just seemed very like trite and trivial for me to be like, yeah. But in that embarrassment and in that, me feeling out of place, the moment that Roger said, yeah, like you can be useful to us, I was so grateful. I was like, okay, cool. Like, let me just tell me how I can help. Like, let me know what I can do. And yeah. And then I went in there and heard from Roger and all the other guys about like what they had just been through. And I was so grateful for like, yeah, just to be able to have something to offer them.
So, Roger, what was going on? I mean, were you guys still hot washing missions, or was this? I mean, because he basically has the all access pass, right?
Oh yeah, yeah. So there was just so much stuff that was unprocessed. I guess just to try to gain perspective of it. I mean, I'd been in the military, over 20 years at the time, and I felt like I'd seen the most surreal aspects of life and death that the military could really throw at you. And out of those 2 decades plus, whenever Scott and I met in Afghanistan, the majority of that was in special operations. And I'd seen combat. I'd had friends killed. I had taken life. I had a fair amount of experience up to this point. But that week really unhinged me. Bulldog Bite was an operation in northeastern Afghanistan. And as pararescuemen, it's a really surreal world because you're always kind of flying into like the worst moment of people's lives. And you kind of do that as a profession. And yeah, we do parachute into a lot of situations, via, real high speed techniques with fancy parachutes and different aircraft and extremely dedicated and the most highly trained pilots and air crews in the world, to get us to those locations. So it's kind of like you're the tip of the spear as a guardian angel to protect and recover Americans and their assets, abroad. And that's a pretty broad stroke. I mean, it's a very surreal world to live in, to where you're drinking a Mr. Pibb, watching Friends, in a deployed location. And then you just get a call, hey, you're going to go fly out to go to a minefield to pick up a bunch of men that are dying right now. And to normalize that, that's the status quo. So you're kind of like in that paradigm as a normalcy. And what the things that took place during the 8-day period of Operation Bulldog Bite, which was in November 10, I think it started, the first few weeks of November there. It was so overwhelmingly surreal. We would fly in on helicopters and everything was a hoist. It was above 7,000 feet. And so that affected the way the helicopters performed. Our job as pararescuemen would be to hoist into those situations and salvage life, protect life, and attempt to get them to surgical teams or just recover the deceased. But every time we flew in, it was just apocalypse now. I mean, it was just so surreal that everyone involved, like their resolve and their intentions, you could tell were not put to the test, but they were transcended. And so, for instance, you would fly in to a situation, and where we would take off to go and pick up the men that were in the midst of these firefights is about just a 10 or 15 minute flight. It's not really that far. It's extremely mountainous. And we would be pre-staged at these FOBs, which are forward operating bases, to go and execute these missions. And so they're just like basically 20 miles away from us, and our radios are really advanced. And so I can hear them talking to each other on the ground. And you would hear men actually in horror, just absolutely beside themselves in horror, attempting to direct or plea for help. And we would take off and we'd fly directly to them. It would take about 10 or 15 minutes to get to them. But we would go into a hover. Again, like I said, we couldn't land. It was really mountainous. And we would be hoisted on these cables to attempt to salvage the situation. And this is the most dire of circumstances. I mean, as you would go into the hover, the helicopter would slow down enough till you could start taking fire through the aircraft. And rounds would come up through the bottom of the aircraft, or you'd see tracers go through the cabin of the aircraft between you and your friends. And we just took all the doors off the helicopters. I mean, it was cold at night and it was below freezing, but speed is safety in those situations. So literally the pilots took their doors off to increase their situational awareness, and we took the back doors. We just kept them completely open. And so there would just be rounds coming through those spaces, and you would realize the surrealness of the situation. And we would be hoisting into situations where there would be men missing arms, dragging their dead buddy to you. And that's a pretty severe picture that I'm painting. And that took place over an 8-day period. The most intense fighting took place on November 14th And it was just by the luck of the draw. You know, there was myself and I had a helicopter that I was in charge of, and I was in charge of the men in another helicopter. And so we're flying in with two Pavehawks.
Wait, had you met Scott by then or no?
No. So Scott and I had not met. Our universes are still very, very separated. He was going through, you know, his paradigm of, you know, getting to Bagram at the time and you know, his world, our worlds hadn't collided at all. So, you know, back to Bulldog Bite, you know, we were flying in doing these things. And on November 14th, it was just so intense. Basically, we hoisted into a situation where we were overrun by the enemy. We ran out of ammunition and we called in Apache gunships to attempt to martyr us and take some enemy out at the same time. And we also called in an F-18 with a 2,000-pound bomb. And again, you know, we did not think that we were going to survive all of this because those munitions were hitting danger close. And again, we ran out of ammunition and it went to hand-to-hand fighting. You know, through the midst of it, it was a long night. That night, 4 men died in my arms. I was able to salvage, you know, 4 to 5 of those men that were critically injured. But it was very over the top. And, you know, I'm really haunted by those experiences, but that is what we're coming from. And when we came back, we had an additional 3 or 4 days after that before we came back to Bagram. And each of those missions were really heavy. I mean, on that mission that I was just discussing there, after we got all the wounded out, we had to pull out the 5 heroes. And hero is just a term that we use for the deceased, you know, the men that die in combat. And those men died horribly in my arms, you know, with mutilating trauma. And it was so surreal that when we got them in the helo, and so we had to hoist those guys out, you know, we had to throw them in litters and get them out of there. And we were taking fire the whole time. You know, those helos come back in and we hoisted those guys out of there, but I had to sit on the deceased, you know, to fly back to a Connex box to throw their bodies in. And when we got back to the main base, I mean, the whole floor of the aircraft was just slick with feces, piss, and shit, you know. It was a really surreal experience, but I mean, within 2 hours, we flew right back out to the same location to deal with very much so those same situations. And it lasted for about 2 or 3 more days of just every 2 or 3 hours flying out to get men that were dying, men that were completely beyond themselves and their intentions of serving in the military and projecting violence overseas. And I was really beside myself as well. I think that, you know, we all have these intentions of why we do what we do, how we get into what we're doing. And that week really did make me exceed the metaphysical aspect of why I was doing what I was doing. And at the time I had 2 sons. One was a teenager and one, my son Oz, who the Go-Ruck tribe is starting to begin to know and respect very well. Oz has cerebral palsy. He's nonverbal. When he was 4 months old, I did CPR on him for about 30 minutes. And so he's got an anoxic brain injury. And so I did, and, you know, I love my wife. You know, we've been married over, you know, 26 years now. And that was my family at the time. And my job was to do these things that I'm telling you about. And it definitely made me go past my intentions. Like it, you know, there's a term in Eastern religion that's like talking about enlightenment. And it's like enlightenment is impossible when the nut is green. Like if you're a nut, if you want to, you know, use a metaphor to your spirit or your soul as being a nut, like your awareness of life and mortality. When we're young, you know, we're bulletproof, and that nut is like this green nut. As you age and you experience things in life, that nut dries out, but the lightest tap of a dry nut opens up. And my nut was pretty dry by that point, and I felt like Bulldog Bite was a sledgehammer. I mean, it really fractured my psyche and who I was and my beliefs, and it made me question many things. So we were coming back from this event that I've been describing, and we landed at our base. And combat search and rescue is definitely a media delight. And when people want to do feel-good pieces on the military, it just makes sense to interview combat search and rescue and the Pararescueman and
But I mean, Scott could have stumbled across any of the tier 1 units or special forces or anything along those lines and wouldn't have walked into the situation that he found himself in, would have found similar type men though.
Yeah. And I think that's a bit of the, if you want to call it grace within a Christian ideology. I mean, who knows why things happen the way they do? There's definitely things that are inexplicable, and I think that this definitely, in my eyes, rolls into that. And that's why it just, Scott's, slightly younger than me. And Scott is, he said that, he deeply respects me as a man. But I tell you, I mean, the roles that we play in each other's lives are really strange, and me knowing Scott, it's overwhelming, and I hold him in such high regards. He's kind of like this shaman priest for me, understanding things. And a lot of that is just circumstantial because the genius of what they were doing, they wanted to understand the reality and the power of tattooing, and it seems very naive to go to combat to understand the gravity of that. And I say naive because the reality of that, of men projecting violence to solve problems, the aftermath of that is grief. And I think that men that do that, men and women, human beings that are involved in those duties, the price of that is you inherit grief, and you inherit survivor's guilt and grief. It's something that takes a long time to process if you ever do. But I can tell you this, Scott showing up with Casey and another gentleman we haven't talked about, David Kuhn. Without those guys showing up, I would not be the person I am. I don't think that I would have found a way to find catharsis, to find catharsis through my experiences. And so, our subconscious is really a strange thing, but meeting Scott and Casey and David with their project, with them being there and tattooing me, it was the most healing thing that I could have experienced.
So Scott, what was your perspective from now? You're inside the team room, and what's the sights, what's the sounds, what's the smells?
I mean, it was a lot. I mean, it's really like, I can't stress enough how different my week was leading up to that handshake that Rogers was. It's like, it was interesting because it's like, I mean, this is maybe being like more honest than I should be, but it went back and forth from being like my childhood. I grew up in rural Louisiana, like in the middle of nowhere, around dirt bikes and guns and fishing. And there's part of me that, like, I mean, walking into that room, it was like every childhood, like G.I. Joe fantasy I ever had. I mean, the toys they have in that room are unreal. It's just like everything. They've just got they've got skill saws that cut through tank armor. They've got like 50 caliber, Barrett, rifle, just any toy that testosterone has ever craved, they have in that room. And, so there was part of me that was just like, wow, just like fascinated by this whole world. But then you could feel, the gravity of what these guys went through. But it was also like their kind of candor and, the way they talked about what they went through. It's like, I remember Jimmy, one of the guys, he had a Band-Aid on his head, and I was like, "Oh, you okay?" He's like, "Oh, I just popped a pimple this morning or whatever." And then, there goes like, "No, they just pulled bullet fragments out of his head, 20 minutes, he just got back an hour ago, and I was just like, it was such a crazy juxtaposition of, this huge, weighty trauma and traumatizing experience that they'd all gone through, but yet the playfulness and lightheartedness that was in the way they talked about everything.
What'd you sense in the psyche? It's not typically a place, I mean, correct me when I'm wrong, Raj, but it's not like you sit around and say, man, I'm grieving right now. Right.
No, of course. No, it's too fresh. Like everyone's still vibrating, from it, so it's not, there was no moment of reflection, and I think tattooing is my world. And I've tattooed a lot of people at a lot of, kind of transitional times in their lives. And I think, people get tattooed when they go through heartbreak or, whenever big life shit is happening that is out of your control. getting tattooed can be really useful in a couple ways. Like it can be like these guys went through something that changed them forever, and there's something to be said for like getting tattooed where you're like, I am a different person and I feel like I need to look like a different person. You know what I mean? Like I physically need to not be the person I was last week because inside I am not that person anymore. And so it was really, I was grateful to be able to have a way to like help acknowledge, just that they are not the same person that they were a week ago. Also in that light, like in, going through shit like that, you feel out of control. You know what I mean? It's like you feel like you're just riding this like just like giant wave of circumstances, and you're just trying to like come up for air. And getting tattooed in that moment is a way to kind of take a little bit of control back. You just be like, okay, well, like all this shit's happening to me that I can't control, but like, I'm going to make a decision that's going to fucking change my arm for the rest of my life. And it's like a tiny thing, but it can be really symbolic where you're like, you are deciding who you are. Your circumstances aren't deciding who you are, but like you actually have a bit of control over who you are from this moment forward. And I think, that kind of stuff is really helpful to people going through stuff like that.
So how'd you get going?
You mean with these guys?
Yeah. I mean, so how do you kind of integrate then, right? You can sense the gravity.
Yeah. So I'm just like a vending machine. I was like, you tell me what I can do and I will, you want a fucking lion on your ribs? I'll give you the best damn lion these hands can make. I was really like so humbled.
So what was the first one that you did?
That was my chest. Yeah.
Yeah. I did some birds on Raj's chest for his kids. And that was a lot of the guys it was stuff for their kids and their wives. And this is like my observation, you know what I mean? Like I certainly don't want to put words in any of those guys' mouths as to like what it meant to them. But like, to me, it was like most of the tattoos either connected them with home, connected them with their life outside of that experience, or connected them to the people they were in that experience with. It was camaraderie amongst their unit, or it was just like something to remind them there was life outside of that place and those experiences.
So that's like Roger's two boys and the grid coordinates that I'm sitting here,
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
touching right this second, because it's just, I know exactly what you're saying. I mean, you did this on Roger's arm. It's right here. And like, I got goosebumps and I got tears in my eyes because here we are talking about that. And I can try to understand the gravity of that situation, but this is right here, on this man's arm. And that kind of bonds you two as well in that moment.
It's like it bonds us all. Like I just tattooed his wife, Scott. Like I just tattooed his wife, Emily, with a very dear phrase that her father used to say to her. And I tell you where we're at right now, GoRuck headquarters. We're in the champagne room right now, but I tattooed her like, just less than 10 feet away. And I tell you, it's crazy full circle. And I don't want to get ahead of the interview or anything, but this place reminds me of the team room in Bagram, and I'm going to do another tattoo here whenever we get done with this interview. But the first tattoo I did this morning, I had to stop. I was like crying thinking about it, I mean, it's been an emotional weekend, my son Oz is here with me. He did an event, in one of the GoRuck Toughs, which I led, it's just surreal, man. But, it's just strange how those tattoos seem somewhat tongue in cheek, but they're so powerful in their ceremony, the execution of it,
Yeah. So, I mean, with Em, like her dad passed away in her arms too.
Yeah. And it's just, sharing humanity with other human beings, in this strangely ceremonious way is, you cannot underestimate the power of that, Jason, really wanted to do this interview. And I mean, to be very honest, Scott, I hold you to an extremely, extremely high regard. And you don't ever have to hold yourself to any high standard by that means, I say never feel any pressure like that, because I'm just extremely grateful that you entered my life and you entered the men's lives that I was in charge of there. because it was the greatest gift that God or the universe could have ever given me. It gave me a way forward. It gave me a new identity beyond those experiences. And it's almost as if you and your abilities and talent and the things that you've generated in your life, my friendship with you feels as if the grief and the experiences that I have had throughout my life are validated. Like it's all worthwhile if I can call Scott up and he wants to do a car wash with me.
No, I mean, I appreciate that. I think, I mean, that all that magic is in you and was there before. You know what I mean? Like, I think in that moment, you guys had gone through like such enormous life stuff. Like, I'm just glad I didn't show up as like an insurance broker or something, because then you'd be like, oh man, I got to be an insurance broker now. Like, no offense to insurance brokers that are listening, but
so you're there for 4 days, right?
Yeah.
I mean, and just listening to Raj describe it a little bit, just basically round the clock. And what was your evolution? I mean, did you become anything more than a slot machine, or was this?
No, it was. I mean, I was a different person afterwards, for sure. Like I remember looking out the plane when we were landing on the base, and literally looking out the window, just been like, I've never been on a military base before. It all of a sudden struck me how naive I was to military culture. I mean, I had an uncle I grew up with who was a Navy SEAL, and he was kind of like he didn't talk about it. He was a Navy SEAL in Vietnam, and it was just something that wasn't spoken of in my family. But he was a man, you know what I mean? And like, he's the one that like took me camping and stuff as a kid. And like, really, like a lot of the self-esteem that that props me up today, like came from him. And so I had, a respect for it, but I really, I went from not really knowing much about it to, by the end of it, I was like, am I too old to enlist? Like, can I, like, how old is too old to like, so like, I'm good. This is like, I get it now. I fully understand. And
what did you get? What was it that resonated with you?
It was a lot. I mean, like Raj was saying, like, combat medics have occupied this really amazing space in the military where they're just taking somebody who might die and keeping them alive, and so that's like, again, like Roger can speak to, but from my perspective, like, there's no question as to the morality of what they're doing, and it is absolutely honorable. And that was really huge for me. I mean, I literally, like, since then, I mean, I just went to 2 years of night school to get my paramedic license in LA County because Raj, you know what I mean? I was like, oh, like, that's what it is to really like be a capable adult, is to like know what the fuck to do in like crazy situations. And I was like, I want to know more, and I'm like, yeah, I can draw skulls and roses, but like, that doesn't mean that much, and so it just made the world a much bigger place and made life a much bigger thing, kind of being exposed to,
So was there any moment where you were like, holy shit? I mean, you're kind of a fly on the wall.
Yeah.
There's kind of a lot of stuff going on. I mean, what?
No, I mean, it was holy shit. It was like, being impressed by them and being so honored that I was invited, you know what I mean? Like, it was validating to me in that, like, the thing that I've invested, my life in, which is drawing pictures that address whatever someone's going through emotionally. It made, like, even though I felt insignificant and kind of trite, the fact that I was useful to these guys and had something to offer them was very validating to how I'd spent, my 30 some odd years at that point, and it validated my whole career. And it's like, okay, cool. Like, because like I said, I was coming from a place where, this craft that I loved just got kind of hijacked by reality TV and mall culture. So in that moment, the fact that these guys, the toughest, like, most honorable, like, men I had ever met in my life, the fact that what I did was relevant to them, like, validated everything. You know what I mean? Like, that's what I got on that plane looking for, was like, somebody tell me that this fucking thing I do is not a waste of my time. That's what I got from that. Yeah.
So how did they express that?
Honestly, just through enthusiasm, the idea that, like, I could do a, like, pinup portrait of Stumkey's wife on and get to like joke around and seeing them bounce from the gravity of that situation to like lighthearted kind of joking around. And I don't know, it was really great. I felt like by us being there, by us not going through what they went through, it brought the outside world into their barracks a little bit, as perspective. It took a little bit of the weight off. And I don't know, like I said, I just wanted to draw the best fucking pictures I'd ever drawn in my life for these guys.
I mean, are you drinking like 100 Rippets a day and blasting Metallica,
yeah.
or what's going on here?
Basically, yeah, there was
we did educate them on the Rippet.
Yeah,
it's currency. Yeah. There's currency involved.
A pallet full. That's what you want.
Yeah. No, yeah. They came in cases. That's funny. Yeah, I haven't seen one of those since then. I haven't heard of Rippets.
I don't think you can buy them. That's strictly an overseas commodity.
Yeah, lots of Rippets.
Yeah. So what's the perspective on, just blood and guts and like the smells? No, I just mean on these uniforms that these guys are coming back with, and just how visceral it was. I mean, unless you're in a horrific kind of ER type of thing, which I don't think you were, like the first time around mass casualties and trauma or that kind of an environment, right?
Yeah. The blood and guts was just on everybody's clothing. You know what I mean? Like I didn't, but even still, it's like, it's in the room. I remember I think Matt was his name, was really excited because he figured out he was like a new way to stitch body bags that were like easier to, he's like, oh, we can throw 3 guys in a bag and this one. And like, we only have to clip in on one thing, I mean, like, and just like, these are the engineering dilemmas that they have in that room. And, but yeah, it was, it's humbling. Like really, like it wasn't a roller coaster of emotions. It was just like the most profound, like kind of humbling I've ever felt. And just really all I wanted to do was contribute and support however I could. And and play with their toys. That's all I wanted to do. I wanted to help them and play with the cool toys they had.
So what was goodbye like?
Oh man, I've talked every day since then.
No, I mean, when you left the base.
I know, but I might have physically departed, but there was no version of me like leaving those guys' lives. Like that was, like I got on the plane, but I still feel as a part of that community as I was before I left. There still hasn't been a goodbye.
So how did you kind of process that experience over time? I mean, I know get into a little bit with Roger through tattooing, but what was your process?
I mean, it was the same. Like we would talk a bunch, and Raj like mentioned wanting to tattoo the guys, and I literally was just like, yeah, like definitely, yes. I remember like just going through my tattoo station as soon as I got back to Brooklyn, and just like throwing all the supplies in a Pelican case and like FedExing it, over there. I'm like, here, like anything you need, like just any tattoo supply you can think of, any materials you need, like, yeah, for sure you should be tattooing. And yeah, it's like any experience like that where you like go work events. It's not like the reason why like people go off and, run themselves till they got bloody snot bubbles, as Raj would say, is so that you come back and all your other problems seem less significant. And it was totally that, where like I got off that plane and walked back into the life that I had 2 weeks prior to that. And all the shit I was worried about meant nothing, like just like the perspective and appreciation you gain for just having 4 limbs and a meal in front of you is profound. And like, yeah, like I was 10 feet tall and bulletproof because none of that shit mattered anymore.
So kind of getting into kind of Roger's transition a little bit, because Roger and I talked a little bit about, he's like, I'm just I'm still processing everything, but it's interesting to hear Scott's perspective because, I'm going through this stuff and I got this dear friend of mine and he's got his perspective. And, whether you deal with survivor's guilt or post-traumatic stress or any of those kinds of things, right? I mean, transitioning out of the military is hard enough, right?
I can't imagine. Yeah.
And so now you've got serendipity, God, grace, take your pick. Roger now has this outlet through tattooing. What's been your perspective on his transition these last 10 or 11 years?
like it feels so strange comparing like my journey with tattooing to Rogers, because he's coming at it from such like a beautiful, incredible like place. And I got into tattooing just because I can't do anything else, and I get hungry every night. I got to figure out a way to buy food. I was like a little ADD kid. You know what I mean? Like, so I was one of those kids that, like, in seventh grade, they put me on a whole bunch of Ritalin because I couldn't focus on anything. And I took it for a month till I figured out I could sell it to my friends. And then, like I have been on, but like I had a real hard time focusing on things until I got to tattooing. And you sit me in front of, I worked in this like grimy biker tattoo shop that was selling meth out the back door. And, I could draw, but I could never finish drawings because I switched channels too quickly, and I would get frustrated and impatient. But here, you put some like big sweaty dude in front of me, and he, pays me $200 to put a dragon on his arm. I got to see that thing through, like out of like, hazard of my physical well-being, this guy's going to beat the shit out of me if I don't like give him a good looking dragon on his arm. And so there is like a sort of therapeutic intensity to tattooing for me, where it's like sitting down and tattooing someone, and going through that process of like having an intention, setting that needle in their skin. Halfway through, everything goes wrong. And I'm just like, this isn't coming out the way I want it to. What the fuck am I doing? And then, but you can't quit. You have to follow through. And by the end of it, I finish it. It's not what I meant it to be, but it's fucking great. And that guy thinks it's awesome. And I'm pretty happy with it. So going through that cycle of like, starting something, wanting to quit in the middle as bad as with more than anything, but seeing it through anyway and having it work out all right. Like that process, going through that process thousands of times, like finally imprinted on me and has helped me function as an adult, and I think, coming out of what, that military career, you get super accustomed to that intensity, and I think tattooing, although very different, has like you have to focus 100% on what is in front of what your hands are on. There's no like mind wandering. There's no like, you have to focus on that. And I think just having something that commands your focus and panicking or giving up is not an option is really, really therapeutic and really helpful. Certainly a lot more than, like guys getting out of the military and then going to Dunkin' Donuts and trying to figure out how to give a shit about somebody's latte. You know what I mean? It's like, it's just not, it's not real, So I definitely see how tattooing could be really therapeutic, because it's at least for a couple hours a day, you're locked into something and you can't think about anything else. There's just no room for it.
All right, let me read something to you before I get Roger to talk about this. I want to hear your response. One afternoon, I asked Jennifer if she could please take the kids to go see a movie. I was struggling that day to keep it together. In those moments, I could have reached for my pistol to end the pain and anguish. Instead, I went downstairs and dug out a gift Jen had bought me a few months earlier, a shitty tattoo kit. I sat down and began tattooing my leg. I know none of that makes sense, but it definitely made sense at the time. I was so consumed with sorrow that tattooing myself made sense. Tattooing my own flesh felt like low-hanging fruit on the tree of suffering for me. Like that is hard for me sitting next to Roger right now to read and thinking where we find ourselves in life sometimes and what we have to do to kind of get out of those. I mean, you've known this man a long time. Like, what's your take when I read that to you?
I mean, like I say I get it. I don't really get it. You know what I mean? Like I as much as I know Raj and I love Raj, and like so much of who I am since meeting him is influenced by him. I can't possibly relate to where his head was, coming back from all that. But I know from my own experiences with tattooing that it's like, yeah, you know what I mean? It's like you need to hurt yourself to feel something, and like it's very like grounding and immediate. You're like, I'm just gonna fucking carve this skull in my leg. Like it just as a way to like restart, you know what I mean? Like it's just like the primal like act of like changing your physical body in that way and just like carving something into you. It really it can be a really like a reset button, and especially, because like, I mean, those guys, they've had to numb themselves out of survival to so much horrible shit that carving something in your leg just to feel it and going through that act of feeling can kind of be a way to start learning how to feel again, and maybe if you allow yourself to feel something painful, then you can allow yourself to feel something pleasant, which from what I've heard is like one of the hardest things is to like, for like those guys coming back to accept kindness, and to like feel warmth and to feel love when it's just like they've had to numb themselves just in order to like open their eyes each morning, like to the shit they've had to see. So I understand like what it means to kind of like to have to start from a place of kind of hurting yourself in a way just to like begin feeling again.
And Raj, what's your perspective? I mean, it's been a while since that, right?
Wow. I mean, there's definitely a lot of miles from feeling, those things that I wrote down to, where I am right now. I mean, I think the struggle's real with everybody on this planet. I think the difficulty lies in allowing the experiences that we have to change us, and I think that that's what real courage is, and I've changed a lot, since I first tattooed myself. I mean, tattooing is just a really odd profession. There's great artists, there's great tattooers, there's great, it's just one of those things that you can't ever perfect. It's a very subjective thing, and I think that meeting Scott under the circumstances that I did, tattooing became somewhat kind of like the, if you're not familiar with the movie, what is it? Close Encounters of the Third Kind. And I think it's a Steven Spielberg movie from the 80s. I think the last time I saw this movie was at like a drive-in, in the 80s. So bear with me if I don't know all the details. But the gist of it is this guy has this encounter with this UFO, and it imprints something subconsciously in his mind, and he becomes obsessed with it. I think they're eating dinner at their house, and there's mashed potatoes and like a meatloaf or some shit like that. And he just knocks all the shit. I mean, he's got like wife and kids, wonderful family, suburban decor. And he just rips all that shit off the table, and he dumps all the mashed potatoes right on the table, and he starts building this mountain. And somehow this mountain was imprinted in his subconscious, and he became completely obsessed with it. And if you've seen that was the kind of fever or fervor or, obsession that struck me. And I think that, and I'd been around tattooing from my adolescence until up to the point that I met Scott. I mean, I had tattoos and things, and I had a dear friend, Oliver Peck, from decades earlier that was, if you don't know, I mean, if you're listening to this, Oliver Peck is one of the head dudes on that show that was Ink Master, for better or worse, with tattooing, right? I mean, but he was in my life in quite a capacity before I met Scott. And I think that's one of the things that I asked Scott about when we first met. I was like, hey, do you know Oliver Pecker? And he's like, yeah, I know the Pecker. I've tattooed at Elm Street. And so, I mean, I'd been around those things, but it didn't have the power that it had. It was just this thing. But meeting Scott when I did, and I mean, all artists have their own specific way. It's like that, my way is not the only way, but it's the only way you can get from me. And I think Scott's stank, like Scott's way of expressing himself and his life experiences, it really resonates with me in a very voodoo shamanistic way. And I instantly became a student of what the power of that is. Like, what is the voodoo in attempting to articulate primal things with modern culture? And I think you do that, Jason, with, some of the things you do with Go Ruck. It's like, even though we are in this modern culture, we are still primal human beings. But meeting Scott, it was like trying to tap into being able to articulate that gritty juju. And I was instantly turned on to it. It became a religion. But what's really interesting, we're having this, Scott, and just to apologize to you, you're roping you into this thing. I was really intimidated to have this conversation. I know that sounds extremely ridiculous, but I was really intimidated to have this conversation because those moments that we've been talking about, and you as what you represent to me, I'm overwhelmed by it, and I don't. it's like I'm almost scared to talk about it because it's such an emotional, or my emotions become very peripheral because it means so much to me. I mean, man, the last, 11 years, whatever it's been, I've definitely been a student, but I was trying to make a point there. And one of the funny things is when I was struggling with tattooing, and any tattooer, whoever they are, you struggle every day with it. It's a very difficult trade. It's like welding flesh, and every time you weld, the steel's different. It melts differently. The thing that you're trying to articulate is different. It's like a psychotherapist welder. I mean, it's a very weird job, I kind of lost my thread there. What was I saying? I get lost.
It was a long love letter to Scott.
I definitely just don't want to gush over Scott. Oh, no, this is what I was wanting to say. Thank you. Yeah. He really didn't give me much instruction. I mean, he's an open book. I can text him anything, and he's opened up other artists into my life that I can text them and ask them anything. And they answer curtly. I mean, like, hey, this is what you do right here. But you have to be smart enough to ask the right questions, right? But the instruction was extremely Zen Buddhist. Basically, he gave me the keys to the candy shop, and he's like, just reduce variable. And I remember he said it to me. That was really the only mentorship that was there, but it was really powerful because that's the same thing in marksmanship. That's the thing. If you want to improve upon anything, you reduce variables and you figure that shit out for yourself. Because if I tell you the way that I do it, it might not become your way. You need to develop your way. And it's such a difficult trade. There's no potential in future for it. It's like a helicopter that doesn't want to fly. You can show up to a tattoo shop, you get in with people, but it is a very difficult trade because it's kind of like a self-discovery thing. You're meeting the clients and you're attempting to articulate their vision of what they want. And it was funny. I put on my business card, to hand out to people, to create contacts to tattoo and whatnot, but it's making good ideas. Making
bad ideas done well.
Bad ideas done well. Yeah. And it's just like, the people that are coming to you aren't necessarily, tattoo artists, and there's a lot of complications that come with it, but it's problem solving all day. And it's very psychological. It's very much a therapy session, many times, whether people want to know it or not, even if they're doing just, silly tattoos or whatever it is, it's all catharsis of some capacity. What's really interesting for me is when I'm tattooing people, the fact that they're in pain, you're dealing with needles and instrumentation and stuff like that. As a pararescueman, many times in the back of the helicopter doing, chest tubes on guys, putting, intraosseous IVs, like sticking IVs through people's sternum, or their humeral heads and pushing blood products and having genuine concern for them. It's almost as if like the people that I tattoo become my patient. And, that's way more than needs to happen. But thankfully, I've worked through that stuff. One of the things that Scott told me to do early on with tattooing is like, hey, just go meet other tattooers and get tattooed a whole lot. And thankfully, one of the people, I live in Eagle River, Alaska.
Industry supporting itself, huh?
But I live in Eagle River, Alaska. It's not a booming metropolis. And just, again, synchronistically enough, just as synchronistic as Scott tattooing me in Afghanistan after those moments of surreal combat, I walked into Deborah and Don Yarian's tattoo shop, and they are established people within tattooing, and they're a very interesting family of tattooers. And so that's as pay dirt as I'm going to find as far as grounding me with making tattooing a profession. There are tattoo schools and stuff, but that's somewhat contrived. There's so much more to figuring things out on your own, developing in the wild, your own techniques and things, but in many ways I felt, with Scott's assistance and all of the beautiful people that he's introduced me to, it was almost like Jimi Hendrix gave me his guitar and was like, hey man, you ever want to, jam, man, let's jam,
Do you think that it doesn't have to be black or white, yes or no, but do you think tattooing saved your life?
Yeah, I think it did, because and I know I say that somewhat haphazardly, but expression is key to catharsis. I think that expressing the things that are in our heart is one of the ways to heal ourselves. If you just write a poem about loss, live long enough and you're going to experience grief, right? It was just, I had chosen a profession that was the express train of grief, and when you play those things out, I had so much unpacked, unprocessed trauma and grief, I needed a creative outlet. people say I'm not creative, and it's like every human being is creative. You have the capacity to do that. You're just judging yourself too much. And when that hurt exceeds your care for the judgment, you become an artist, and I just feel extremely thankful that Scott came into my life, and even Casey Neistat, we've kind of blown over him, but it took all three of those guys to show up there.
We got to get that video out.
Yeah, and it's funny. I've got that video. We're going to watch it tonight at Jason's house. That rough cut video, and I need to lean into.
Oh man, yeah.
I'm going to lean into Casey to say like, hey man, can we do something with it, man? I know you're just surfing out there in Cali, but let's do something with this thing, man.
Yeah. Oh, I think but it's also. I think he struggled too because we went out there to make this little video, and then the magnitude of the experience itself just made the video seem so, It's one of those things where it's like you walk into a situation and you're like, okay, do the thing. And then you realize what's happening. And you're like, oh shit. Okay. I should not be filming this. You know what I mean? Like I think it's the situation itself was so big and powerful that documenting it would have prevented us from experiencing it. And, but yeah, nudge Casey, who knows? It'd be interesting to see something come out of all that, or even just, we'll do the Where Are They Now video.
Hey, so Scott, do you have any sort of, do you give any thoughts sort of why you came into Roger's life, vice versa? However spiritual or lack thereof you want to get, how far have you taken that?
It's pretty crazy. You know what I mean? It's, I don't have a spiritual explanation for it, but the fact that the moment, down to the fact that Raj had, a 20-year military career prior to that moment. And then he had the most significant, incident in those 25 years happen. And then I'd never fucking been to Afghanistan. You know what I mean? I'd never even occurred to me to go there. And that the one time in my life, we decide to bullshit our way onto this base, which we had no business being on, and pulled up to the PJ barracks and, got out of that truck in the exact moment that Raj was walking from a helicopter to the barracks and happened to stop and shake it. You know what I mean? It's just literally those points crossing and happening to hit right there was you're talking about a 60-second moment in a 25-year career that I just happened to land upon. And yeah, you can say oh, I would have run into someone else or whatever, but no, I don't think I would have. It really, yeah, I can't ignore just the extreme coincidence of us kind of shaking hands in that moment. And I'm certainly appreciative and grateful that moment had a positive impact on his life, but I had, absolutely turned my world upside down as well and shifted my priorities. You know what I mean? It's I was just looking for a reason to keep doing what I do. And there's no bigger reason than those 4 days spent there. And yeah, like I said, and then coming back, I felt so inadequate in my ability to handle shit in emergency situations that I was all right, I need an education. You know what I mean? It's I want to be a more capable person. And I'm super grateful that he made that a priority, because I've been through, I've been on some scary ambulance rides with both my kids now, and felt like I was more capable in helping my kids because Raj made it a priority to be better at that, and I just don't want this podcast to be too one-sided. I absolutely have grown exponentially from that day.
All right, Raj, as we sort of wrap this up, is there anything that, number one, we left out, or is maybe more importantly, is there anything you've kind of haven't asked before? You're
Yeah, I'm just kind of overwhelmed with it. It's such a powerful moment of my life, and Scott represents such a key figure within that, he was an affirmation that I could not recreate that. I needed that. I needed who he was and is and represented to me at that moment. and it's kept me here on this earth. It's affected everything about me. I mean, I think that maybe in some ways I chose to understand the discipline of tattooing to understand him more, or to understand how much that helped us at that moment. I was just overwhelmed from those experiences, and it grounded me. Those things grounded me. And meeting Scott and spending time with him and realizing that those events affected him. He was like the innocent bystander, right? Like, I mean, you know, to realize that him meeting me, or me meeting him, brought me back to my humanity, or brought him closer to his humanity, is affirming to me. You know, that the magnitude of that is grounding, because I was lost. I think while he was there tattooing us, I was looking on Wikipedia. I searched the internet on our computers that we had there in our, you know, Scott's using the term barracks, but we basically had a place that, you know, we called the Honeycomb Hideout, or the Opium Den. And it was, you know, like a team room, not unlike, you know, where we're at, you know, right now in Go Ruck headquarters, but it was very much so patented after the movie Platoon, when the guys are down there smoking grass and listening to Motown, right? You know, down there in that scene, you know, and having Scott, Casey, and Dave show up when they did was like this, you know, just a completely blank slate showing up to be like, hey, what do you guys think of this, man? Like, what's going on here? You know, I was searching immediately for validation. I jumped on our computer and was looking at stuff on the internet, and a Wikipedia page popped up, and it said something like Bulldog Bite, you know, blah, blah, blah. This many, you know, coalition casualties, this, and this, the most severe fighting happened on the 14th. And that was validating to me. And for some reason, when I would get validated, I would start crying. And Scott represents that to me. You know, I mean, like that God, the universe, you know, just the frequency of the universe allowed him to be there at that time to allow me this healing vector, you know, for him to show up and tattoo us. I think there's a famous philosopher in the 60s, his name is Carl Jung. And he basically said that, you know, serendipity or synchronicity is created in our mind when we have unprocessed events. And I can try to find more meaning there is that's actually there, but that coincidence, whatever you want to call coincidence, synchronicity, whatever that is, it can be overwhelmingly powerful. And I think that if you're courageous and you allow events of your life to change you, that's present every moment of every day. But that nut has to dry up. You have to cultivate the energy, or the metaphysic energy, to allow awareness of that. But like I said, Scott's sledgehammer to is just like this sledgehammer of magic to me in my life. And I know I'm projecting way too much onto another human being. You know, I mean, I've got a lot on my plate. You know, I mean, I try to say no to nothing if it allows growth. And I think that's our relationship here, you know, with Go Ruck and Tribe. But I mean, look at this. I mean, it really affects so many things. You know, the courage to say yes and let things change you. My son Oz has been sitting here the whole time that we've been doing this interview, and Scott is going to do a Go Ruck event with my son Oz.
Oz is very happy.
You know, Scott's going to do this Go Ruck event with Oz in San Francisco, man. They're going to do a mile star course up and over the nasty, nasty hills of downtown San Francisco. So, and we're very excited about that. I mean, Oz is turning 18 in a year. And man, that dude's going to get tore up with tattoos, man. I mean, it's going to be intense, man. I mean, Oz has grown up in a tattoo shop, you know. I mean, this whole pandemic thing, we just took Oz out of school, and we shut down for a few months with tattooing, but Oz goes every day to the tattoo shop. I think Oz has done something like 50 tattoos now. He signs his name for $20 cash only. Yeah. And he's very proud of those. He's actually pretty good. He's kind of got a heavy hand, man, but it just adds to the allure of the. It
heals up eventually. It's fine.
But yeah, I mean, I'm absolutely so thankful for Scott, man. I mean, I'm thankful for the relationships that knowing him has blossomed. You know, I mean, just, you know, going to Save Tattoo, which, you know, Scott founded with a bunch of other extremely talented artists that, you know, is grown into so many different things, and me meeting other people. It's what I needed in the exact time that I needed it. And a lot of that is inexplicable, but I'm not going to say no to it. And I think Scott taught me to accept that mercy, love, and grace. You know, he's one of the the agents in my life, one of the forces in my life, as well as my son Oz, as well as you, Jason, I mean, that has allowed me to say yes and accept that mercy, love, and grace, within my life and to find a meaningful life,
Yeah. So in closing, I'll kind of tell you what, because there's another thing that made me cry a little bit right before he's about to tattoo Emily. This is what it means to him. She's never had a tattoo, right? Wanted something for her father, naturally a little bit nervous, got Darlin, which is what he used to call her, on her, what do you call it? What's
Ribs.
In the middle of the side of her.
I tried to talk her out of it, put it on her arm, but.
And Roger looks at her and he goes, I just want you to know this is way more important to me than it is to you. and he meant it, right?
1,000%. Yeah.
And to feel and just see, I mean, I just saw the weight, all of it come off of her, right? And such a gift to be able to give like that. So anyway, Scott, it's been awesome chatting with you. Thank you so much for being gracious with your time and most importantly, your time with Oz coming up here out in the great city of San Francisco.
I can't wait. I'm so good. But yeah, by the way, like this is my daily driver. This is like for years now.
There you go. Awesome. Is that a GR1?
Yeah.
Yeah, the classic. Well, I'm glad you're using it and abusing it. It doesn't look brand new, which is awesome.
No, it's got some miles on it. It's got some miles on it for sure.
Yeah.
I didn't just get it for this podcast. It's got love.
All right, man. Well, thank you so much for chatting. And this has been something
Interesting to say the least.
I mean, sitting here next to him and chat, I just feel like, when time kind of dissipates and it's just this kind of triangulation thing between the tattoo on your arm and on your chest right there and Scott there and going over Afghanistan and where Oz was at that time. We were just chatting about that. Oz is back at home and now it's on his chest and Oz is right here. And anyway, I feel I don't know exactly, words fail me a little bit, but this has been very special for me. And I'm grateful for just to get to meet you like this and for chatting today.
I appreciate it. No, thanks for, I mean, like I said, podcast, car washes, whatever's Roger's doing, I'm doing it.
Go Ruck events in San Francisco.
Go Ruck events. Yeah. I'll see you guys in August for sure.